So now it is my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, and they will talk about their journey in neuroscience, the medical sciences field, and expose you all to some of the ways that you can get a PhD. There are multiple ways that you can get a PhD, and that is to say all of those ways are special and great. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce Carly Leannah. Graduated in 2008 with a bachelor's, and then 2015 with a master's, and now is a PhD candidate in the Penn program at Gallaudet, PhD in Education and Neurosciences program. So let's give a warm welcome to Carly. Thank you, Del, for that wonderful introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here at the DHEP STEM conference. I remember I was here in 2008 to 2015, and DHEP STEM opportunities, outside of the classroom were limited. We had classes related to math, science, biology, chemistry, but a place to come together and meet people who are interested in STEM fields was pretty hard to find back then. So I'm really thrilled to have this opportunity at this conference to bring us all together. Like Dill mentioned, there are different journeys and different pathways to becoming a PhD candidate, and I look forward to sharing my journey with you all. So this is the agenda that we'll go through today: my background, my research work, navigating PhD as a deaf person, my time at Gallaudet. And I'll help you envision what becoming a PhD candidate looks like and what the work is involved, in that. Navigating PhD as a deaf person, I will be explaining my areas of interest and why I wanted to gain a PhD. And then at the end, I'll save some time for Q&A. All right, I was born and raised in Wisconsin, in a small, medium-sized town. So the resources for deaf folks there were quite limited. My parents had me, found out I was deaf, and I was the first deaf person that they met. They didn't know how to raise a deaf child, so they looked for resources, and there were a few that they were able to find, and they were trying to figure out which one was the best to fit my life. Only focusing on audio and speech was maybe not the best way, they thought, so let's expose her to signed exact English and sign language. It's still around a little bit today, signed exact English. However, that's what I had learned back then. I had a cochlear implant surgery so that I could access audio, and I read so many books. I loved reading, and still to this day, I am an avid reader. I really appreciate and love language. Really, that made me who I am today because my parents really exposed me to a bilingual education. Before I jump ahead, I want to talk about my school experience, my educational experience as a mainstream person. I did have some other deaf classmates as well that I formed relationships with, and then I actually went to a different mainstream school in 4th grade, and I was the only deaf person. I had in a deaf program as in my previous elementary school, I felt like I had peers, I had friends, I had people I could socialize with. And then moving over to this other mainstream school, I felt a little bit lost and lonely. There was a summer camp that I went to. It was the Deaf Week at this summer camp, and so I met a lot of other deaf children like me, and that stuck with me for a long time. I wanted to connect and feel connected. I had peers at my previous elementary school, and then at Deaf Camp, I went there until I was a teenager or in high school, right? And I had peers there. At 15, I went to the Deaf Leadership Camp at Gallaudet, which has since been shut down, but that's where I had attended camp. I didn't really know about RIT and TID at that point in time. So I was going to Gallaudet for this summer camp at 15 or 16, thinking about what did I want to do for college? Do I want to go to a state university or do I want to go to Gallaudet? I didn't really think about RIT, like I said. I had met many peers at the camp that were talking about RIT, and I'm like, wait, what is RIT? What is NTID? What does that even mean? So I went home after camp, and I said, hey, Mom, Dad, I want to go to maybe RIT, NTID in New York. And they were shocked, where are you going? New York? So we looked together at the school and figured out that, yes, it was going to be a really good fit for me. So I applied to RIT. Again, my journey to getting here was a little wonky. I got into RIT and TID and had not decided a major. I came in as undecided, and do the deaf thing, figure out my deaf identity. And of course, once going into college was becoming real, I had to pick a major. Communications was what I picked and realized that it really didn't fit what I was looking for. So then I majored in biology, and I really liked that for a while, but it was not my passion. My roommate at the time was a major in psychology, and I saw her coursework and what she was doing related to her major and her goals that we were discussing. I was like, ooh, that fits. That feels like it fits better with what I want. And then a few of my other friends who were majors in psychology, we got together and discussed, would that be a good fit for me? And I decided, yes, it would be a great fit. So I graduated with a BS degree in psychology, and then I was trying to figure out what was next. I got a job, and it was a pretty low-income job, but I wanted to support myself. I didn't want to rely on my parents anymore. So then I decided to stay for a master's degree at MSSE, Master's in Secondary Education for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, here at RIT and TID. And then I really fell in love with research, and one of my professors hadn't expected me to really delve into research in the way that I was, but we had discussion groups and research questions coming up and hypothesis development and experimental designs and analytical thinking, running analysis on data, and looking at other people's presentations and their work that they were doing in research. I was really inspired and I wanted to do that. So I was thinking, should I become a teacher? I'm getting this degree in MSSE. Let me hold the research for a moment. So I graduated with my MSSE degree, and I taught English on the West Coast at Washington School for the Deaf for about 4 or 5 years. I really enjoyed that. I had my deaf identity. I was really feeling I had that down pat. And then I was helping deaf students who had a really strong deaf identity develop that even more and become more motivated to learn and expand their mind. So I really loved teaching. It made it really hard to leave, though, because I really loved it. During the last 2 years of my time there, I did want to pursue teaching more and see them grow, see the students grow, but I always came back to research. I was always thinking about, I could be doing research. So I applied to 2 different universities for PhD programs. I applied to the University of Texas at Austin. They have an educational psychology program there, and it's a post-secondary outcomes for deaf and hard of hearing, NDC. I did want to work there as a PhD student, but I was not accepted. I also applied to Gallaudet, and I thought I wouldn't get accepted to Gallaudet. I didn't think that I would meet their, standards. I was in psychology and STEM, but I didn't really have any STEM role models. I didn't have any opportunities like this conference to learn from people who were doing these types of jobs. So they accepted me at Gallaudet, and I was shocked. I want to become a scientist, and just kind of went with that dream, So I went ahead and interviewed March 13th of 2020. We know what time that led into, right? So everything went on hold after that. They were teaching on Zoom after March 20th. So then I had to pick an advisor to work with. My advisor from the start would be involved in the interview until now. They're still involved with my research and my PhD course.
So we'll hold off on that for now. So thinking about grad school, have you all heard of Grad Cafe? Have you heard of Grad Cafe? So I was waiting to hear back from University of Texas. Gallaudet, I was waiting to hear back from them as well. I'm in this process of just waiting. Oh, so they were feeding me some anonymous information as well, some things that were kind of giving me clues as to whether or not I would be accepted or not. And University of Texas talking about the interview, like, oh, if there's no interview, then I probably won't get in, and that's kind of what was happening. And you know, during COVID, doom scroll came up frequently during COVID, right, because of everything happening in the world. So this was kind of like doom refresh. I was sitting there waiting, am I accepted? Am I accepted? So be careful with that. Don't let those things happen to you and get, you know, ruminate on the doom scrolling or obsessions. So now I'm at Gallaudet in my last year for my PhD, working on my dissertation. I have a few months left, and I'm working on that. I hope to defend it later this spring, and I'm really excited. I work in the Action and Brain Lab at Gallaudet, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the lab where I work, my boss is my advisor, Dr. Laurel, if you're familiar. And so this lab that I work in has two main foci. So when we learn sign language, depending on whatever age, whether it be a child or adult, as you learn sign language, and or being deaf, how that might impact visual perception. How does that impact the way we take in the world, receive the world around us, and take in information? So that's one area. And then how can we use that experience or language to leverage emerging technology? And I'll talk a little bit more about this soon. So those two areas that we focus on, we use both behavioral data analysis and EEG. So question and response time to the questions, right or wrong answers based on like behavior, and then research around that. We also use EEG. You know the EKG for your heart? You're familiar perhaps with that testing. There's like little sticky pads that are picking up the signal, and then we're able to read the signal on a machine. Essentially, those pads are meant to read the signals within your body, and it's hard to do it on your scalp with hair. And so I learned from Atomic Hands yesterday talking about liquid. This is the sign that they use, liquid, right? There's more liquid so that it can attach, or gel, if you will. You can see, again, the picture here. So every time you move, you can see sort of the movements within the chart as well. I won't go too much into this, but this is just essentially some of the results of the research and the work that we're doing within the lab. So we had 15 deaf signers and 15 hearing individuals that did not know sign language. And then we calculated all the data and found the average. So you can see in the top here, that's the data analysis for the deaf signers, and then the non-signers that are hearing. Also, one-handed signing, such as guilty versus two-handed signs. Do you know school, right? That requires two hands. Defense, family, sure, these are two-handed signs. So those are some of the things we looked at. And again, we compared it to hearing individuals that don't know sign. Why do you think there's such a difference? You see that third column in the green and the red. You can see that for signers at the top, there was a lot more red, whereas hearing non-signers, less of that red. Why do you think there's a difference in results? Like visual, spatial, recognition, in 3D language compared to English, which is more linear. And there's different requirements for the language and the way the brain works. It's maybe like less complicated than sign language. Part of it, yeah, that's part of it for sure. So a hearing person who doesn't know sign might see movement and visual movement happening compared to a deaf person who sees that this is a language and it has meaning, and so the way the brain processes it is different. Great answer, yes. Hearing people look at sign language, they see family, defense, these two-handed signs. It's just random movement to them, right? Again, these are hearing people that don't know sign. It just seems like random movement. And of course, it has meaning, but they don't know the meaning. And so they really can't put two and two together, but deaf people who know sign language know the difference, right? So that's what's captured here in these results. And there's a lot of different things that we do in the lab. This is not my project. This is something that occurred before I joined, but this is just a sample of some of the work that comes out of our lab. So I have a few videos that I'd like to show you. The first video is just assigning avatar. So neuroscience and behavioral research is something that we focus on, but I'd like to also incorporate the tech part as well. So I'll be talking about that too. So this is assigning avatar in this video that you just saw. Our lab partnered with another lab, or another one on Gallaudet campus to develop this. But I'm wondering what your criticism is of this video that you just saw. Right, no facial expressions, lack of non-manual markers, correct. What else did you say? Bacon, kind of the way, the location or the palm orientation for the sign, it's kind of close, but not exactly maybe spot on. Eggs and bacon look the same, even though they're two different signs. It was kind of hard to tell, right? Yep. You know, using 3 fingers versus 2 for bacon. Yes, absolutely. Any more criticisms or thoughts? The blinking, right? Facial expressions are incredibly important in ASL, right? But there's really none on the avatar, so. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but this the original intention of the project was kind of just to start somewhere and start piloting to see if for people who are using learning ASL through like VR, virtual reality, what that might look like if they had a signing avatar teacher. But again, this is more of a proof of concept versus like a finalized finished product. The accuracy of signs, yes, are a little So I don't know dancing very well. You know, if I go to a wedding, I can dance a little bit, but I'm not an expert who's taken classes or studied dance. So tech skills for dancing, I don't know the name of the technical skills. But if there's another person that I know that might have been a avid dancer, maybe they went to Juilliard, a famous dance program, and performing arts school. If I watch them, who's an expert at dancing, for example, parts of the brain light up. There's a little piece, there's sensory motors within your brain that begin to light up. And it's activated based on what's being watched, right? Someone who has more experience with that thing we're doing, such as dance, has more activation in the brain. So that's basically the foundation of my studies and the neuroscience behind embodied learning. When you physically interact with something or an action, and then later I'm more passive, perhaps, just watching, you're still thinking about, what if I were to go do that thing? What if I were to do the dance? As you see, I'm signing right now, right? And you're watching me. You have parts of your brain that are lighting up. And so the same sort of activation is happening, even if you don't have experience with sign. This was linked to another research project, where it was looked at. I don't know if you can see this. You can see this picture on the right, the black image with the white dots. What do you think's happening in that image? What's going on? Maybe someone's finger spelling. So this is a quick screenshot, and I'll show you a video, but this is just a snapshot from that video. And there's two different types of finger spelling we have in the video. One type is like location and name. I don't know. Barcelona. Barcelona was the word that was being finger spelled. So location or proper name. And then we came up with something out like a city name that was finger spelled. And I'll show you the video, so hang tight. But why we show this is because we want to look at the experience of deaf signers using sign language, acquiring sign language, becoming fluent in sign language, and then how that impacts the receptivity of their brain. On the next slide, this is the video. I want all of you to watch. I'll show it twice. So take a look and try to see what they're finger spelling. Did you catch it? Who knows what was finger spelled? Anyone? I'm going to play it again, but we'll show it one more time. Istanbul. Now I'm going to show you a made-up city name. So obviously this one's real. Clarendon or Clarendon or Colden, something like we're getting different finger spellings. Also, again, a made-up name. Why do you think it's easier to catch the real location or the real proper name, even though you don't have the full information there, right? Because some of the letters are the way it's formed and how the information is finger spelled and received. You can catch it without always having all the information, but with this, you can't. Why do you think that's the case? Because of context, perhaps, and schema, what you already know in your brain. We want to assign meaning to things is another answer. Yes. I've already seen it before, so my brain was prepared to make the connections, perhaps, compared to something that's made up and I've never seen or had access to before. So, right, when I tell you that it's a real town name, Istanbul, you have context. It's a real city. You can kind of filter through information, but when you have the made-up name, you have to look at, because you know it's not real, you're trying to identify all of the letters as opposed to filling in the gaps with the missing information.
All right, so finger spelling project that I just showed you, that was just one of the finger spelling projects that we worked on. This was all online, collecting data on behavior all online. We couldn't put the EEG caps on. And then we did the test and the tasks with the VR headset as well, with the signing of bacon and eggs. And now our work is on developing more facial expressions, non-manual signals, and motion capture suits, trying to put placement and movement into a electrical signal and make sure that the camera isn't in the way of anyone's facial expressions or blocking any sort of receptive ability for facial expressions. So being in person, of course, live is the best for learning ASL. We have found that throughout our testing. Having the option to watch videos is good, but what is the middle ground is a kind of mixture of both of these is what we're finding. So we have in the middle, this is a motion capture setup. It's a Mobi device. And so within neuroscience, I'm working with technology, and it's really cool that you can do these sort of random seeming tests, but have it become a mixture of all of the interest areas that I have had so far: psych, neuroscience, and sign language. So my project is looking at human and computer interaction, not the engineering part of it, but we have a whole expert panel of engineering folks and tech folks who make that part work. But we're focusing on the user experience and the interactive interface. So we're focusing more on UX, UI design in cognitive behavioral sciences. And so now what the bacon and eggs avatar looks like is revamped, and it's on the right over there. It's a much improved version than the first one. My dissertation research that I'm working on right now and investing so much time in is from all of this data that we've been collecting over the years. And like I explained before, watching someone who is an expert at dance, having no experience in dance, you're still lighting up those areas in your brain and activating those areas in your brain. And that can be seen in VR settings as well. So we had two groups of participants, passive video watchers and hands-on learners in the other group. And they had VR headsets and modules and models, and we were trying to balance and figure out where is the middle ground of learning. This is our design study, and this is how we collected our data. So we're collecting data through the EEG and collecting that stimuli information through a computer graphic and looking at the waveforms while people are watching either VR or live signing videos. And then we retest them. So I have a question. Why do we think that it's important to do a pre-test and a post-test? Someone saying experience, yeah, to engage more. Yeah, we need to have a baseline, right? We need to see what it was before the interaction happens, get those waveforms from the EEG, and then compare them to what it looked like after the person had had the exposure and figure out where the activation was higher or lower. The important part of science that I've learned through my journey is while running experiments, setting up a hypothesis, having that ready, and then changing it later is not a good practice to have in the science fields. If you are changing them, that means that you're maybe finding different results and changing based on the results that you're finding. You have to set a hypothesis, go with it, and find what you find. So VR, being more interactive with hands-on learning or more immersive learning is pretty cool, and people are finding that they're able to remember and understand concepts that are being signed in those VR spaces. We're still working on the analysis right now, but that is a hypothesis that I had. All right, I'll share what I've learned during my PhD. Things that I wish I knew before I started this journey. Do we know about REU, research experiences for undergrads through NSF? I'm getting some yeses, some no's, some, yeah, maybe kind of. So this is for undergrad students who are interested in research fields, and not just for science fields, for many different fields, engineering, biology. Lots of different universities partner with REU, and you can look online to find them if you're interested in research opportunities. It's almost like a camp for research, fun research camp, right? There are many research labs that want undergrads working in their lab to show them what research looks like and to support undergrads running experiments and running data analysis. There are several undergrad research opportunities. There are several labs locally as well for undergrads here at Roscoe. So this doesn't have to directly relate to your field. If you are a chemistry major and you want to branch out into neuroscience, you can involve yourself in research areas that overlap your two experiences, chemistry and neuroscience. So if you're doing computer science majors and you're thinking, hey, I want to do some more biology research, there are overlaps in different STEM areas that you can direct research in. It's always good to develop job skills and figure out, your career path. Your job doesn't always have to line up exactly with your major. There are research projects, and how do you think that you can transfer these skills to other areas of work? Like, how does it translate to other areas in your life? If I have a project, how would that apply to a future career? For example, running a meeting, setting up timelines, goals, those sorts of concepts may help from a research standpoint. Yes, exactly that. I didn't expect to learn coding. What is your sign for coding? Do we have a sign for coding? Coding like this? Coding like that. All right, coding like this. Okay. Someone told me that was for tags only. That makes sense. But yeah, we're developing some new signs for coding. Okay. I didn't expect to learn how to code. If you are involved in any research, it is important to learn how to code and learn coding programs. How many have us experienced RStudio? RStudio. There are other coding programs as well. What do you have? Do you have one? An example? Yeah, in Python, we've worked with Python before for statistics, C++ or C#. So learning RStudio, I didn't know Python. I didn't know how to. I could use it a bit to apply to the computer learning language that I was, trying to develop, and working on picking up Python as well as RStudio was a bit difficult. So I focused on RStudio. It was much more simple, and people had these beautiful graphs that they were figuring out how to make, and you could put your data into the matrix, and it would make a really wonderful graph, and it was a free opportunity for me to learn coding.
So this is one of my favorite slides to talk about. There's two pictures here you see on the right. In Marseille, in France, where they made soap. That's why this is the sign. But I went there. The Society for Neuroscience conference. And I really enjoyed it. It was mostly hearing individuals. It wasn't a deaf conference, but I still did enjoy. Navigating a hearing conference is very interesting, and it requires mindfulness and preparation, and not just talking about email and getting the services set up like interpreting and whatnot, but mentally preparing to be in a hearing dominant space, especially with accessibility challenges. Not for this conference, which was amazing, by the way. It was awesome. But another conference I went to, I tried not to kind of create too much of a discussion, but people sometimes still are a bit limited with their information, and I think it's really important to stand your ground. You know, we do have the ADA, and conferences are required to abide by them. Sometimes we need to advocate for ourselves. And so that's what I did. They did, you know, there was NAD, for example, that were letters, there were letters that were, that I borrowed and was able to email to the conference sort of as a way to advocate for myself. So there are some templates out there that can be used. Networking with hearing people, also quite an interesting experience. And I love networking and meeting new people. Just have to be ready for what works for you, and you have to know what works for you. Everyone's different. I had one friend, colleague. What works for her is being able to use like a device that connects to her phone that creates smooth communication for her. But you know that doesn't work for everyone. And using a phone back and forth and writing is an option, but you know, especially if the interpreters are busy, you don't tend to bring your own interpreter. You have like teams of interpreters that work together, and they're often assigned to, you know, various individuals. But so sometimes we have to use, they're often not assigned.
They're not assigned to individual deaf people. They're there just for the conference, and so sometimes you have to figure out other ways of communicating with your hearing colleagues there for presentations, or people want to share, you know, what is their topic going to be. You have to post that in advance, and then I can connect with them and say, hey, I'm gonna want to meet this person, and you know, be able to email them ahead of time if I've gotten the information in advance. So that does take some work setting up that process for networking. But I loved everything that I do, and I want to talk about people that also have passion projects as well. So it's really fun, and I get to geek out about their work as well.
No, you're good. These are just some more things to think about, food for thought. And if you have any questions on it, let me know. And I'm wondering if there have been any questions thus far, because I am wrapping up. This will be my last slide. So now would be the time for questions, if anyone has any. Are there none? Does that mean I covered everything perfectly and you all understand crystal clear? We do have a question. This is a little bit of a personal question, but in terms of your work and work-life balance, as you have on the slide over here, how can someone navigate a PhD and balance personal issues in life while also pursuing their PhD? It's a really great question. In my teaching experience, I felt very overwhelmed. It was a very interesting experience, but that was where I started beginning to learn work-life balance. So when I came into my PhD program, I brought some of that thinking with me, and I realized I didn't want to burn out. And so like one example would be, well, and also my advisor was amazing. She really emphasized work-life balance. She did not want me to be too inundated. So I'd already seen other stories from PhD candidates and advisors who were sharing what, you know, was going on for them, and I kind of wanted to avoid some of those issues myself. So work-life balance, you know, thinking about, for example, my first 2 years taking PhD courses. There's a lot of work, right? A lot of reading, a lot of writing. And I found myself like at 10 o'clock still reading and doing homework. And I would have to set a boundary to disconnect. It's easier said than done. It's so much easier said than done to disconnect when you have things to do, but it's important to do so. And I'd have to, you know, make sure that I kept up my hobbies, stay with things I was motivated with, physical hobbies like moving and rock climbing at the time, and running and walking and being outside, something that I love. And so I stayed involved with my hobbies. And it's really important to think about what helps you disconnect from the things that stress you out. I tried learning knitting as well, and I was so enthralled with other people who could knit in the ways that they could make beautiful creations, but I just couldn't figure it out. It wasn't a hobby that worked for me. And I was still thinking about work and trying to learn knitting, which was kind of frustrating, so it wasn't giving me any release or relief. But running, walking, being outside, physical activities helped me actually break away from work and break away from stress, and helped me let go. So find what works for you to help you let go. Any more questions? After you get your PhD, what does the work look like for you? What are you involved in? What's your dream job? Yeah, so as I mentioned, I have a few months left for my PhD, and so I'm thinking about my career after this. My dream job would be working at a university, I think. I like university research and doing research. And I will still continue to pursue it, but something that's kind of got me a little hesitant is when I moved to Washington State, I loved it there. I really want to live there again. And they do have a university there, but in terms of deaf programs or accessibility, it's not the same. Gallaudet here, you know, it's very different. And so having to think about my dream job, I also have to balance that with, will I be the only deaf person? Will I give up where I want to live in the mountains and the beautiful scenery and being able to hike outside in the beautiful Washington air to work with deaf people, which I love and want to do, but they can't seem to exist at the same time. And if you know how to make that work, please let me know, because it is hard to figure it out. But essentially my dream job would be to work at a university and do research. Another question. Postdoc. Are you planning to do a postdoc? Yeah, so there's a job I'm interviewing for right now, actually. And there's a thing about academic research. So thinking about industry, you know, industry work and industry jobs, working for a company like Microsoft or Apple, more kind of a black and white regiment, you know, you get interviewed, you get a job offer, or you don't. But university research, there's kind of like an informal offer that could happen. And then you negotiate from there, and that becomes more of a formal position later. So it's a different way, it's a different system to navigate. And I do have a formal offer for a postdoc, but if I decide to go ahead and do that and accept that track, then I will do it. But yes, I have been interviewing for postdoc as well. Another question. I know you kind of already mentioned a bit, but when you graduate, will you maintain your interest, like the dissertation you wrote and your PhD defense? Will that apply to your postdoc work, or would you niche into something different or focus on education or teaching? Where would you go with it? As for the postdoc, as I just mentioned, I'm interviewing for it. But before I came into my PhD program, I kind of envisioned neuroscience research, reading and writing. And I love my research. I love what I learned, action and reception, but I thought I would originally focus more on literacy. And it didn't end up happening. I kind of, sidetracked off to something else. But the postdoc interview would be kind of going back to those roots a little bit and kind of trying to find the way to merge both of them. Still would be neuroscience as the main focus. And right now, as I mentioned, we're using the EEG. You remember the CAP. And then using functional MRIs, which are just two different ways to capture information and understand the brain. And so what I'm learning now through the EEG is helping me merge with the fMRIs. And in that journey, I'm still learning as well. And there's a lot of overlap, and we're figuring it out. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. I do know some people who are majoring in chemical science and neuroscience and bring, computer science and neuroscience, and they bring the computer science to the neuroscience area and blend them. People who want a PhD or could benefit from a PhD, what do you think about for their advice for their dissertation or their research if someone wanted to get a PhD? Well, you'll be stuck with that research for, 1 to 3 years or more. You will have to focus heavily on that and dive fully into it. Not your whole life being focused, but your whole professional life essentially will be about the topic that you choose. So pick something that's interesting to you, something you care about and you're passionate about, not something you think you could get sick of shortly. My dissertation, again, we're talking about VR learning. And when I was a teacher, I noticed that hands-on learning was, I made sure to include hands-on learning because it was an important part of students' learning and engagement in the way that information stays with you and we actually learn it and commit it to long-term memory. So my advisor was an expert in EEG research, and their lab used VR, and so I was able to kind of combine the two. I'm very grateful that my advisor let me pick my own track and my own research questions. I made them up on my own and, of course, had feedback and got advice from her, but a lot of it was self-led, and so I'm really grateful that I was able to do that. And again, I would just say find something you're interested in. Find something that is try to simplify. I don't want to say it'll be so simple. It's a dissertation, but simplify it in the way that you can collect data and analyze and not be too complex.